so this is the fifth teaching of our cultural engagement class or session or theme, whatever you want to call it. And so far, what we've really done in this class is, one, we kind of defined what we mean by cultural engagement and kind of provided a vision of what it looks like to be a cultural engager, which what we talked about is the church needs to be a people who are cultural engagers rather than cultural responders. We talked through that the church traditionally has been people who have just responded to culture. They've responded in a couple ways, either kind of hide and huddle in their own camps and kind of like just, we're going to have our holy groups and we're just going to kind of wait until the world goes away and one day we'll fly off into heaven, or they've kind of pointed fingers and they've criticized, they've critiqued. And so we see that cultural responders either critique culture or they consume culture. They're not doing anything to make culture better. They're not doing anything to actually press into culture. They're either critiquing it, pointing a finger, and I'm sure you all know that person who could tell you everything that's wrong with the world, and it's all CNN or whatever group whatever TV show they watch they don't agree with. It's all their fault, and they can critique and explain why all these things are going on. And the second is consuming. Is that we've moved to a day and age in the church where in the 50s and kind of in the 1950s, 1960s, like there was a time where it was like a sin to go see a movie in the church. And now I know more people who are Christians that have seen The Hangover that have not. And so we've kind of moved quite a ways from critique to consume. I don't know if I said The Hangover on this, so that'll be live, so there you go. I don't endorse that movie, I want to make that clear. But we see this movement in the church where it went from, hey, we can't even engage with any movie to, yeah, we know people that have watched really anything. And there's not a lot of even engagement on that level. But moving from a responder to a cultural engager is someone who creates and contends, who creates culture and contends on behalf of culture. Someone who doesn't just stand by and watch culture continue to move and kind of isolate themselves, but decides to create it and try to take up our call to be stewards on this earth, our man-made, our given identity as human beings, as the Imago Dei, to actually walk in and steward what God has given us with our gifts, our abilities, whatever He's allowed us to be a part of, and actually create culture that's not there. Human beings can actually create things that are not there. It's part of what is uniquely human. And then also to contend on behalf of culture, not just look at it and point fingers and be angry and say, hey, let's just write it all off, or not just to consume it without any intention, without any thought, but actually contend on behalf of it, hoping to see renewal within the culture around us, which is the end goal of all of this. And we talked through that in the following weeks. We talked through worldview. We talked through what it looks like to form a worldview, and that our worldview is kind of the lens that we put on to see how the world works, and that as followers of Jesus, we continue to have our worldview and that lens shaped by the kingdom versus the culture, but we need to fight for that. We talked about that within a worldview, kind of what encapsulates, the two main things that encapsulates a worldview are the stories we believe about how the world works and the rituals we regularly partake in. So Sophia was here a few weeks ago to talk through the stories we believe, that there are competing stories of the good life, of what life looks like here on earth, and we are constantly battling these stories in culture to show that there is a greater story that is the kingdom story of what God is doing here on earth. But we need to fight to actually make sure that we are living by that story versus the stories that our world or even Christian culture are portraying as well. And then the rituals we partake in, Brett unpacked that we are being formed by the things that we do, and a lot of our rituals are forming desires within us. And so a worldview is not just, hey, here's what to think, but rather it is really fleshed out of what we desire. And so again, brushing your teeth, he used this as an example. None of us brush our teeth because, maybe at this point we do, but for most people, they brush their teeth because they want the feeling of the freshness afterwards. And they actually learned that people are more likely to brush their teeth when they have that taste of mint. The taste of mint has nothing to do with actually cleaning your teeth. It is just to leave you with a desirable feeling afterwards, because they figured out people will operate off of their desires rather than what they know. And so we as people need to make sure our rituals are forming certain desires towards the kingdom, creating a proper worldview that will allow us to be cultural engagers, versus rituals that will form us away, desires that are away from the kingdom, again, leading down to that path of just being a cultural responder. All of this can be encapsulated in this idea that we are called to not just stand by and watch our world be the world, but we are called as the church to be the hope and light of the world, a city on the hill, showing a different culture, a different way of living. In order to do that, we need to understand what is going on in our world, but also how are we supposed to live within the world to actually bring an impact. And so that brings us to today, where we are talking about ethics. Let's get ethical. If you know, you know. Yeah, some of you got that. It's an Office reference. But we're talking about ethics today. And a couple caveats. I am not a philosopher, and I'm not an ethics expert. And so some of you may have taken philosophy classes, or you've read books on ethics, or this is not a deep dive into what are ethics. This is a broad overview. And really the hope for today is to help us see how does being a cultural engager, how does that force us to have to wrestle with ethical decisions? And also on the flip side, how do the ethical decisions we wrestle with allow us to become a cultural engager? And how do we actually engage in that wrestling match? And the reality is, if we are going to be people who are actually entrenched in culture, what I mean by that is not just becoming like culture, but actually we are in it. We've decided not to just wall ourselves off and hold the world at arm's length, but we are willing to actually step into difficult and dark places. We need to actually become people who understand and know how we make ethical decisions. What is the difference between having morals and making ethical decisions, and what is the process that we need to go through in order to navigate that in a healthy way? Because we have probably seen in the past the church operate in ethical decisions in a way that may not have been the most helpful. Either going way too far, one way of pushing off the world, again, being very critical, pushing off, pointing fingers, drawing very hard lines, making things very black and white that aren't necessarily black and white, and not being motivated by love, or on the flip side, just kind of embracing what everyone thinks, being accepting of all things, and again, not being motivated by love, but being motivated by wanting to be accepted by the world, and again, not actually paving a way to be a cultural engager through our ethical decisions. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about ethics.